Hello, welcome back. We are on page 8. This is the part 2 of the lecture on the VR counselor working in rural America. We're continuing to talk about the strategies to address the rural challenges faced by the VR counselor. One strategy is community advocacy. One of the best strategies I've seen utilized by the VR agency is getting out and getting to know the community and informing people and being active in schools, chambers of commerce, local government, going to, just attending town hall meetings and kind of being the face of persons with disability and making sure the community is aware of their needs just in general. So, that's sort of an added role. A lot of times urban counselors may not have to fill that role, but a lot of times the people with disabilities don't have that advocacy voice and don't have that representation in smaller communities. And what that in turn does for you is that it gets the name and the face of the program out there, so that businesses or school systems or employers are aware, and they will then come to you as the counselor, maybe with an opportunity or an idea. So that's how partnerships are created. Counselors have got to be able to try to utilize the best available technology. Distance learning, Skype. You can, with 2 laptops, you can basically have a conversation just like you're in a room, or whatever two-way video now that's on that people have on their laptops. So or computers, home computers. So that mode of transportation or communication has just exploded, and many of our consumers are able to use that. So maybe that might, instead of driving 2 hours to meet with the consumer, if they're comfortable with it and they feel that it works for them, then you could maybe have a telemedicine or a computer communication with them, and save your time in travel and their time in travel, because it costs them money to come to your office as well. Email. And while there's lots of ethical issues related to email, it's still, so long as you do your due diligence in explaining the ethical issues and the limitations, and you understand that anytime you use email, you can never see nonverbals or understand the possibility of misinterpretation. It's still a great tool to communicate with individuals without having to travel a long distance, or without them utilizing resources to come see you. Rehabilitation technology. Many services are out there that can assist individuals to be more independent, to maybe drive or provide transportation opportunities. There are many high-tech and low-tech options out there that can make individuals be able to live much more independently. So, working well with the rehab technology staff person, and keeping yourself aware of all those up-and-coming trends and new technologies that seem to come out every day is very important. Another little-known possibility resource is the state-operated or a comprehensive rehabilitation center. There are currently 8 state-operated centers. They typically provide comprehensive rehabilitation services, generally in a residential setting. They're generally short-term in nature. Unfortunately, there's only There is only 8, but I'm trying to think of the states: Georgia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Virginia, Maryland. I think I may be missing one, but those are the general areas where they are. And if I don't know if I mentioned Kentucky. There's one in Kentucky. But they provide comprehensive settings, meaning vocational assessment, work adjustment, vocational training, physical rehabilitation, psychological services, medical services, in a residential setting. So it's sort of a one-stop for VR services. So they can go there, receive the services, and then they don't have to worry about driving to all those services. And if you live in a rural area and you have to drive 2 hours, how many trips does that save just for each one of those? So that's a great resource for the rural VR counselor. Other strategies, it's hard in rural areas, just like with certain minority populations in urban areas or just with different cultures, to just work alone with the individual. You have to develop relationships with the families and get their support. Obviously, you're going to make sure you do all this in following ethical guidelines, but it's still important to involve them in that process. You need to develop relationships with employers and chambers of commerce. It's very rare that you're just going to be able to walk in and place an individual the first time you meet with the employer, because that mistrust of government carries over not only from persons with disabilities, but employers, because much of their interaction with government has largely been tax related and regulation in nature. So the joke is, among employers, nobody ever comes in and says, we're from the government, we're here to help you, and actually mean it. Even though we actually are, there's still that lack of trust. It's important to develop that relationship and develop balanced relationship with service providers. Because there are limited service providers, it's always difficult for a counselor, because if there's only one psychologist in the area, you probably shouldn't make them mad, and if they refuse to work with you, it might be very difficult for you to access psychological services for your consumers. But you have to maintain advocacy. If that psychologist isn't providing adequate services, you have to advocate for your consumers to make sure they're getting what they need. So it's a very tough balance, but you have to maintain that. You may have to expand the role of the counselor. You may have to focus on meeting immediate needs. You may have to pick up the phone and call churches, call Salvation Army, because the person comes to you in need, and their needs need to be met, and by helping them with that situation, you're going to increase the likelihood that when those situations get resolved, they're going to come back to you, and that trust is going to be built between you and the individual. Another strategy is to be creative, flexible, and patient. And many times in rural areas, you've got to try different things. You have to understand that time moves, slower. That people have differing views of independence, and you just have to let them dictate the flow and be there for them when they're ready. Also, another strategy is to subsidize transportation. If the person needs to attend doctor's appointments or needs to attend training, or you want to pay their first month's rent their gas for their first month going to the job until they can get their feet settled, their feet under them. That's a great option. Emerging tools. Telemedicine and distance counseling, those are emerging tools. They seem to get better. When I first started in this field, it was a pipe dream that we would one day be able to effectively interact over a telephone or computer line face to face on distance technology. Now it's common. Many the deaf population depend on webcams, and it's not something that the VR counselor should ignore if that's a preferred mode or an option. Many laptops now have come with a webcam and utilize that. Regional public transportation is part of that United We Ride program, that federal interagency initiative to give more access to people in need of public transportation. Be active with those boards. Make sure they're continually trying to increase access, so become involved with them. But there's a lot of positive things. Those regional transportation boards better understand the needs of their areas and are more able to address those issues, so be active with them. Distance learning, we talked about the problem accessing training. There's a lot of professional training for individuals with disabilities in need of some skill attainment. There's a lot of professional training that can be provided online, semi-skilled work training that can be provided distance learning wise. Again, you have to do your homework and make sure these are credible. Agencies or service providers, make sure they're not fly-by-night operations, and that when the person completes that training program, that they're going to be able to find employment or to improve their standing in their current job. Another emerging concept is that higher education is expanding. A lot of your community colleges are finding ways to partner with four-year state institutions to offer four-year degrees at smaller schools. They're also developing partnerships with master's degree programs. So that's a great access issue that's being taken care of. Cell phones, smartphones, there are so many things that can be done on cell phones that can assist persons with disabilities in how we communicate with each other, how we access information, in rural and urban areas. Even though cell phones are still an issue in rural areas, coverage is getting better. Social media sites, an emerging tool. One of the big issues, and we've not really covered it yet, for persons with disabilities is that they don't have many peers with similar disability-related issues to them. So social media sites allow people to gather at those areas and sort of support each other and have these online support groups, and it kind of bridge the distance between individuals, that they can be all over the country and still supporting each other. And that's a great it's a great strength for opportunity for persons with disabilities, and they can educate themselves, they can learn to advocate for themselves, they can learn a lot about what's going on in other areas related to disabilities, and bring some of that back home, hopefully build some more confidence in what they can do as a person with disability. Another emerging concept is this concept is the thought, and you're seeing it in business and economic development, that the world is flat, that we Eastern Kentucky or Montana or West Texas can in today's digital marketplace, we can provide the same services that your urban areas can. Because so much is done through technology. If we have the technology available, we can grow our own business and do it right here. So you see a lot of areas, a lot of states trying to establish rural technology corridors where they try to grow their own business that can do business all over the world. So that concept is growing, and I believe that we will see that have a significant impact in the next 10 to 20 years. Asset building programs are starting to take hold in a lot of your public support programs, your SSI, SSDI, welfare, to where individuals can put together proposals and they're allowed to save money, and that money may be matched so that they can purchase houses or vehicles, and that will increase their stability and their ability to work and become much more independent. The church's role in human service, probably in rural areas, and while this does provide some ethical issues and some problem areas in terms of the interaction between religion and government and sometimes understanding human choice, they still are filling a critical need and critical gaps in especially immediate service provision needs or service need, or just related to, as I said earlier, food pantries and clothes closets, and they continually have been expanding, and they're accessing government grants now, and a lot of times they can provide services, driving, volunteer driving of individuals to jobs or medical appointments. So the churches, even in smaller churches in rural areas, are starting to put together, and they're networking with each other. So they're kind of developing coalitions, and part of those coalitions are providing services to the elderly and what they call the needy, which oftentimes includes people with disabilities. So a good VR counselor develops those and utilizes those resources as they can. Another emerging tool, and one that I think is still in development and has a long way to go, but that's why it's an emerging tool, is the ticket to work concept, which is done to encourage service providers to gives the opportunity of choice for persons with disabilities who want to get off SSI or SSDI. It gives them the opportunity to take this to an employment network that will help them find suitable employment. And businesses are becoming much more savvy about this ticket to work and seeing this as an opportunity not only to gain employee, but to defray some of the cost of taking on that employee by utilizing the ticket to work reimbursement money. So there's a lot of hope that this may one day turn into what it was intended to be. At this point it has not, but we're starting to see some movement and some changes in the way this is done, and there's still a lot of process issues, but it is still a possible tool that the counselor may be able to utilize in the future. So as we've discussed, there are a lot of challenges. There are strengths. There's good and bad about working in the rural area, but there are some readily available strategies, and the good news is there's help coming on the horizon. There's been a lot of there are a lot of people that are working very hard to extend services, and plus technology is helping us bridge that divide, that gap. More and more rural areas are getting access to high-speed internet. High-speed internet gives us, the old term used to be the information highway, and then we can open up the labor market if we have, if we have access to the technology. And the VR counselor has to be there to assist their consumers in taking advantage of these emerging tools. Thank you for your time and attention, and we will see you next lecture.